Bear with me 1 second. Okay, Brian, just check that we can see the right screen there. Perfect, lovely. So as I said, Brian and myself, and this is the first in a series of 7 sessions that we're doing. So there's going to be half-hour sessions on different subject areas within recruitment. And the first one is proactive versus reactive recruitment. So we're going to talk about the difference between those two and the advantages of each of them. And the disadvantages as well. And the main thing is, you know, it is so important that we get recruitment right, because recruitment is a really, really expensive process for an organisation. And whether you're recruiting on behalf of a client or you're recruiting for your own business, which as recruiters you have to do as well, it's understanding the cost of recruitment. And this is the most recent figure that I've seen, which is from the Oxford Economics study of 2014, which is a little bit out of date now, but this is the most recent figures I've got, and it's about £25,000 per hire. And that's made up not just of the logistical costs, so it's not just hiring a temp, dealing with the applications, HR's time, setting up interviews, all of the administration that goes around with that, the manager's time for interviewing, and any recruitment costs that come into that, because that can be anything between sort of, you know, £1,000 and £10,000 for even at a more junior level, and a more senior level that can be significantly more. But it's taking into account that lack of productivity. So when somebody decides to leave, they don't always put in the same level of commitment that they did before. So you can potentially have up to 3 months of somebody's end of their career with you where they're not as productive as they could be. And then it's been estimated that it takes up to 28 weeks, so that's just over 6 months, to get the new hire or their replacement up to speed. So you're looking at potentially 9 months of lack of productivity. So it's just that reiterating why we're doing this series, because it's an expensive process. So we want to do what we can, especially now, to help people get it right the first time. So
I think this is interesting. These stats are taken from up to 2019, and I think it's right to mention that 2020 is a very different year, but it is that's the most obvious thing anyone's going to say today to you, I can assure you. But these stats will come back to the fore as 2021, 22, 23 go on. And what I want to do is set a little bit of context. And these statistics are taken from the likes of TalentLift, from LinkedIn itself, from McKinsey. And it really looks at, you know, setting the scene between what people do currently and how this impacts the recruitment process. So, you know, talent acquisition people spending, you know, 1/3 of their week sourcing. My own experience, and if any of my consultants, previous consultants were sitting on this, I used to get frustrated that they would sit and sift through CVs or sit and sift through profiles for hours on end. Again, it's just a bit of paper. You know, it's a profile, it's on the screen, it's a CV. But 1/3 of the working week of talent acquisition professionals is spent doing this. The largest bottleneck is through the communication pipeline. So what line managers want versus the hiring process. I have a really great example where a friend of mine was recruiting, and he was pretty senior, brought in an HR business partner, and one of my ex-colleagues went to see them, and effectively they were having a bit of a mini row as to what they wanted. He wanted mathematicians, she wanted statisticians, and they couldn't agree, and all of a sudden the bottleneck is created. And to hear about that firsthand was very interesting. The lack of skill, we hear more and more about that. Now again, obviously COVID has changed that a little bit, but within the tech field, life sciences, there are lots of skill shortages. Engineering fields with an older demographic, there's big changes. And again, how do you find the right people going forward? 78% of candidates are not happy about computers making the decision. So again, it's back to, you know, where do we sit with reactive and proactive recruitment? Tech companies investing in online tools, so AI, automation. These are very, very huge, important decisions being made at the moment by CEOs, MDs, investors, that, you know, do you automate the process? LinkedIn's become the main channel, 625 million people on LinkedIn. It's a great way. Facebook in the USA in 2018 was actually the most used way of finding candidates. Again, awareness on social media. But the big thing here, the last couple of points I want to kind of put you, is that 70% of the global workforce are passive. So how do you know that the people you want to recruit are the right people? Because if you send out an advert on LinkedIn, on a job board, you'll get the applicants who are aggressively or actively in the marketplace. Does that mean you're getting the best candidates? And we'll come to the human element in a little bit. And then finally, obviously, for those of you on the call who are agency, temporary recruitment has become very important. So talk about flexible staffing from a business point of view. There's also, from a candidate perspective, there is I think they call it, what's the exact title? It's about when candidates want to have the flexibility to go into work. So they don't want 9 to 5, they don't want Monday to Friday. There is a specific term, but I cannot think of it off the top of my head. Gig economy. So the gig economy, where people want to have that flexibility, and that goes through the full process itself. Helen, if you want to.
There we go.
And then the other bit, and both Helen and I met working for a big generalist recruiter. Different agencies, different internal teams, and different companies will put different metrics on what they look for and what they need. But I wanted to highlight a couple of metrics which I think people forget, and it is modern day recruitment. Time to hire. So Helen alluded to it. When someone's leaving, how long is it taking to hire? When do you hire? Do you hire only when person A hands in their notice? The source of hire. How often are people actually within a business or internally looking at the return on investment? Are they doing the same thing? Are they using the same job boards that they've always used? The candidate loss rate, and I would tie that in with the candidate experience as well, in that a lot with an agency, when you've got a big database, it's wonderful. It's the most great thing. You've got millions of people you can call upon. But actually, it's also a negative as well, because you don't have to have that human element, because you can go back to a big, broad base. And that goes the same now for LinkedIn, Facebook, and even Instagram and Twitter. Do you look at offer acceptance rates? So is there an issue when people get offered a job, why they don't take it? And again, you look at that from what is the motivator of that candidate, put them into a reactive box rather than a proactive box. Are you improving retention rates? And what is the cost to the business for an open role? Now, I think that really crosses all three, both agency recruiter, internal recruiter, and business owner, decision maker. What is the true value or the true cost to that role being vacant for any length of time? Also considering what Helen mentioned about when somebody leaves, are you getting optimum performance out of them as well? So I think it's important to have these metrics in the back of your mind before we move on to kind of the next few slides, which really go into the reactive and proactive.
Okay. So we're all familiar with the standard recruitment process. And from my days as a recruiter, I remember getting those phone calls and it was, oh, such a body's resigned, or somebody just told me that they're pregnant, or somebody's been about to be promoted, so we now need to find someone. And that tended to be the way that we received recruitment, and that tends to be the way that a lot of recruitment happens in organizations. And then it's a case of, right, we need to advertise, we need to see some CVs, we need to shortlist, we need to interview, we need to make a decision based on those people. And the problem with that is that you're getting the candidates that are available now, the candidates that are available immediately. And what we want to talk about is in terms of that preparation. So you've got two choices. You can either be proactive in your recruitment or you can be reactive in your recruitment. And if you think, you know, at the moment, the world is in such a bizarrely different place than it has been. And if we react, we all end up with things that we don't necessarily want. I was saying to Brian earlier, you know, I ended up with a stack of baked potatoes that would have lasted a family of 12 for about 4 years because I had to get a massive warehouse pallet. But when it comes to recruitment, being proactive and thinking and actually understanding where your business is going and knowing what kind of people you're going to need in your business allows you to be much more proactive about the way that you go about your recruitment. It gives you a longer time frame and it prevents that reactive panic, recruiting someone that feels like the best thing available at the time, but actually, with hindsight, turns out to not necessarily be the right person. So Brian's going to talk to you in a bit more detail about those two different processes.
I think it's pretty interesting, that last picture, that wherever that supermarket was, that actually someone bought the top Dr. Pepper. I thought they would have still been a little bit in the side. There's maybe 12 tins of Dr. Pepper, the thing that nobody wants, or pineapple aid, something like that. So yeah, reactive process. Now, I mean, I've talked over the years, you know, about this, that reliance on paper, and I do mean electronic as well. We expect, when we get something in front of us, we expect an engineer, a finance director, an MD, whatever it may be, to be able to write a CV. And we expect them to be able to write a CV based on the job that we have got advertised. Now, if you think about, you know, doing a webinar, we're all busy people, and even, you know, if you're job seeking, it's a full-time, you know, it's not employment, but it's a full-time task to be able to do it. Yet we will make an assumption, being reactive, that we post a job, and as we talked about the bottleneck earlier, that we've agreed that that job description is correct. But when we get a CV or a covering letter through and it doesn't meet all the criteria of keywords, then actually it's not the right person for the job. So lo and behold, you don't progress them. And this also happens with applicant tracking systems. They're set up in a way that actually, if there's not 20 keywords or the CV is over 2 pages, disregard. So that a human being doesn't even get to see it. And again, that's the frustration of people. But we're back to a reliance on someone being able to capture their career into A4 bits of paper. And I think that makes it interesting, because what it does, it alludes to a little bit of bias. And our webinar next week is based all about bias and how to try and remove it from the process. But for me, reactive recruitment lends itself to bias a lot more, because people look at a surname. Oh, their surname is Singh, or their surname is O'Shea, and they then make an assumption. Oh, they're from this place, they're from that place. Oh, they've worked in this place for 22 years. They must be 50. Now, we all have bias, and I don't want to run into that session today, but reactive recruitment, because it's an application-based ideology, really, it lends itself a lot more to that. Also, you know, as Helen's touched on, think about if you're a hiring manager or you're a recruiter. What does your client say to you? What does your line manager say to you when they come to you and say, I can't believe someone's leaving? So there's physiological and psychological disadvantages here, which are proven, that as a line manager, myself, if someone was leaving, how did it make me feel? So, you know, I would maybe get a bit nervous, maybe get a red neck, or you sweat a bit, or you get out of breath a bit, because that's my best biller, or that's my best engineer. You know, what will I have to take on the work? And all of a sudden, physiologically, you change. But psychologically, there's also an element there as well, that you start to panic recruit. Because as we've talked about, when you get to a situation where you know someone's leaving, we know the cost, as Helen said, circa 25K, but we also know productivity can be down. So psychologically, I will just get me somebody. Now, I don't know for any of you on the call, if you've been agency recruiters, but I don't know how many times I've had a client who's going to pay a lot of money say to me, just get me someone. And that has then transferred now into my new life at Ucruit when I work with companies. We need someone ASAP. So I used to joke and say, it's not the first bum in the seat, it's the best bum in the seat is what you want. But actually, we're at a situation now where because we're being reactive, we're changing it. And the last point is based on minimizing the pool. So as Helen says, you all of a sudden take people who are active in the market. Is there anywhere that says that's the best possible person? It could be. I'm not dispelling that. But you are minimizing the pool because of two reasons. One, your psychological frame of mind. And two, you're judging it based on a CV. You're judging it based on a name, or they work for this company. And for any of you who are on the call here from the northeast of Scotland, you'll know in the oil and gas industry that there's a fight between non-oil and gas and oil and gas, that people in the oil and gas industry don't always want to recruit from out with. And then on the flip side, when things take a downturn, people in the non-oil and gas industry don't want to hire people from the oil and gas industry. And I've seen this cycle now for 12 years since the first downturn. And again, because we're always being reactive. So how do we change that? So I'm now going to show you, I think this might be the first time in history in a professional webinar that Football Manager is going to be referenced. So you'll get in to see the wacky ways of my mind and how it works now. So Helen, if we can go to the next one, unless you've got anything to add from the reactive element.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's very much that for me, it's about we're getting the best available candidate now, not the best available candidate. And I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. So for me, the first thing I put here is the human factor. So you'll see obviously baseball, you'll see a short list. I'm a big believer that sport and business can lend itself to each other. And I'm lucky I've been speaking to someone who's pretty high up in the sports field, and they think the same way, that we can learn from the different industries. But for me, proactive recruitment is the human factor. And I want to just share something my dad said to me years ago. So he had his own business, and as did my grandfather. And my dad used to say, it's who you know, not what you know. And as a young boy going through life, that was my kind of who you know, not what you know. And then I got into my career and I thought, do you know what? He lied to me, the bugger. It's really what you know. And the last 12 months, I've changed that again. And I figured that actually what you know is an internal aspect. Who you know is vital because it's based on the dating principle. So if you know somebody, the more you get to know them, the more you'll trust them. And it's no different to that first date. You have a first date because you might quite like the look of each other. And the first date is about finding out, do you have common ground? What are the things that you are off limits to you? Do you like this? Do you not like this? It's exactly the same thing. So by who you know plays a very big part. And anybody on the call who's seen hundreds of CVs will know that you'll see people who have gone from being a chef to a commercial manager. And if you ask them the question, say, well, how have you done that? Oh, my sister works there. This is my auntie or uncle's business. I know the owners and they know who I am. And you see it time after time. Because all of a sudden, you're actually recruiting based on a human being rather than a bit of paper. And you're recruiting based effectively on core elements of that human or core skills, rather than just a case of, oh, I'm looking at the CV and I can't see what they want. The next element is based around about the transaction. So the reactive recruitment is a transaction. You put a job out there, people send their CVs, somebody screens them, somebody interviews them, and then you make an offer. And that's the transaction. Whereas some of the best situations I've ever heard, and I was just saying this to Helen, I got a call from an ex-colleague a couple of weeks ago, and he told me he was leaving the company he was working for. And the reason being is he has, for the last 2 years, been coveted by another agency. They've taken him out for dinner a couple of times. They've taken him for coffee. They've met up and they've got to know him. So in his personal life, he's decided to make a change. He's gone there. Why? Because actually the dating principle comes in that he knows who they are. He knows who, they know who he is. and actually there's a better match there. They've saved themselves thousands of pounds on recruitment fees. They've said, which is not great for an agency recruiter, I grant you, or a rec to rec, but again, it's that same idea, and it can go for agency recruiters and internal recruiters. The third element, which ties in with my two very strange visuals, and I'd be interested if anybody gets any weirder visuals than this today in a webinar. Moneyball recruitment is what I talk about all the time, and it's based on the film Moneyball, which is the Oakland A's baseball team, and I'm not a big baseball fan, and a guy called Billy Beane. And Billy Beane took statistics and worked out what the strengths of an individual was. And instead of saying, well, actually, we want to sign the best player in the league, he worked out that this player could run to first base almost every time. And by doing that, it helped other elements of the team grow and be better and stronger at what they do. So effectively, he, on paper, hired a bunch of also-rans, a bunch of journeymen, people who were over the hill, people who had bad knees, you name it, they all showed up. But he played them to their strengths. And for me, with the onset of social media, like it, love it, loathe it, wherever it may be, you've got a better chance now as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, as a business owner, to be able to see what fits into your team better. It's not just a CV. With LinkedIn, with video, with whatever we have, webinar, podcast, you name it, you can get to see the strengths of that individual. And how often do you actually plan your recruitment that the person you want isn't necessarily an all-rounder? It is that person who will get you to first base. So for me, I believe that by being proactive really, really alludes to having an understanding of where that person or persons fit into that team. Now, obviously that's baseball, and it may be a bit easier when you can get some statistics to see if your recruitment consultant can make 5 phone calls or get 1 CV across. But what you should be thinking about, both as an agency recruiter, internal recruiter, and as a hiring manager, is how much do you actually shortlist? And in recruitment, and I don't know if Helen maybe would say something differently, when I hear the word shortlist, all I think about is the word CV shortlist. I don't necessarily think more long-term about that shortlist. Helen, do you think anything other than that?
Yeah, no, CV shortlist, or candidate shortlist, whichever your terminology is, yeah.
Yeah, and it's that transaction, so that element of recruitment. So for me, why don't you, this is a game, this is a made-up game that's been on the go for 20 years. But what you can do, I can go and search for a player. And as I've done here, I can add that player into a shortlist. I can look at their potential, their ability. Okay, there are some things within the game you wouldn't do in real life. We don't care about someone's height or their age or nationality even. But you get the idea behind actually shortlisting people for future vacancies. And I think it's something that we miss out a lot. And I think it's what a lot of agency recruiters miss out as well, because it's a transactional, reactive element that they will look at this job they have done, or an internal, this vacancy they have currently. And then from there, once that's closed, it's closed. The really good recruiters will go back and revisit that. But I would say that would be the exception to the rule rather than the rule. And similarly, when you see the amount of people advertising a job, 2-3 times a year, that would suggest to me that there's not been a build-up of proactive recruitment, because really what you're doing is you're targeting specific people. Now, for the argument of this one, you've got a position seeing here on this list. That's no different to position. It could be you're looking at succession planning. It could be your FD. It could be your head of HR. It could be the person who comes in for 6 hours a week, but you can't live without them. You can shortlist that. So you go back and you start to build a relationship with them, which means it's wholeheartedly targeted for what you need. Because we're back to the dating principle. If I've met Peter or Alexandru or Fedor, I know who they are. Those statistics tell me one thing. But unlike Moneyball, the human element, when I go to meet them, I know if they're a good team fit. Now, you may sit thinking, well, that's great, but I've got a business to run, or I've got X, Y, and Z to do. But think about the psychological and physiological way when you get that possible vacancy. How much of that time could have been spent for those half an hour coffees over lunchtime, weeks, months, even years in advance? So I don't think it's a wasted time, and I think it's very much a case of short, medium, long-term understanding of where you want your business to be, or if you're an agency or internal recruiter, where you want your clients or hiring managers to be. And I think if you're on the call as a job seeker, I hope that you get to see a little bit more of the insights to what you could also be doing to proactively go and speak to your contacts, to your anybody at all, your network, really, your extended network, to be able to go and say, look, I'm available, let's have a coffee. And the one bonus of COVID, and I do say there's only been a handful of bonuses, would be that we can do this. We don't need to all meet up in a networking event or in a coffee shop or a bar. We can all go online for 15 or 20 minutes to do this. So think about if you were commuting for 1 or 2 hours a day, there's 1 or 2 hours you'll be having a coffee with somebody to try and build up your portfolio. And please, 2010, I wish it was 2010, 2020, a write-off of a year for a lot of businesses. For a lot of people, it's not. But remember, this is about a medium to long-term strategy as well, rather than just the here and now, which is what both Helen and I have alluded to.
Brilliant, thanks. And I can give you a really good example of proactive recruitment. A few years ago, I left L&D and went back into frontline recruitment. And I was working with outsourced facilities businesses and contract caterers. And I was recruiting for regional managers for those businesses. Now, I only had 2 clients, and those clients recruited the same types of people in different geographies all the time. And what we used to do is we would create a talent bench for those businesses. And that talent bench would be different for each one because culturally they were very different, but the skill sets of the people that they needed were exactly the same. So industry sector might be an issue for one but not for the other. And what we did is we mapped the market. So we had a list of who their competitors were, who were those people in those roles, in those competitors, and we made contact with every single one of those people. Not all of them responded, obviously, but what we ended up with was for each geography, at least 1 or 2 people that we knew would be open to talking to those businesses. And we would sometimes get them to have that first coffee chat 6 months before there was a role available, because for exactly all the reasons that we've just talked about, so that they knew they wanted to work there. So they didn't go through 3 and 4 interviews and then decide, actually, no, it's not right for me. All of that has been done up front, and it does feel like an investment, and it is a time investment. But what it used to give us was that if I got a request for a regional director for the northeast of Scotland, I would, after the first 6-12 months, I had 2 people that I could go to, because Brian will attest how difficult it is to find different types of people in more rural areas. But because we put that proactive work in, when that line manager got a resignation, they didn't go into that panic mode because they knew that we'd been working on that for them. And yes, it might cost them a bit more than a £1,000, here's your CVs, but we knew that candidate was right, and they knew that candidate was right as well. So in summary, recruitment's expensive. For you, for your clients, make it count. Look at identifying, as we've both said, those types of talent that you most often recruit for, or that you're going to need in the future. A lot of people have a lot more time on their hands at the moment to think and plan for their businesses. So think about who you want and what kind of background and experience they'll have, and then map that market. And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about this. I've got loads of things up my sleeve to make this easier. So map the market, see where those people are, and make those proactive connections and develop those relationships with people. Because it does, being proactive helps save money in the long term, and gives you a better pool and a better set of candidates to work through. So our contact details are there. What I will do, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I can have a look at There we go. Hello. Oh, we've still got people there. That's always a bonus. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to check the chat and see if there's any questions in there. So Kev, when I was in recruitment, I was placing individuals on a day rate that was outside of any threshold of salary for that discipline. So is that on a temporary and the contract market? Is that
Yeah, well, what I meant by that was when I was at CSL, Brian might know CSL, part of DOF Subsea, I worked with Project Excellence, who were essentially a couple of guys who ran project controls recruitment. And they had built up, just what you're saying there, they'd built up a beautiful pool of project controls people. And they were trusted in the market. So if people wanted a planner or cost or a risk or a contracts guy or a scheduler, they came to us because we knew the pool. They knew that we knew the pool, and our guys are experienced project controls guys, so they can vet them to death before they put them in, and they know the client. What I meant there was I also pulled on a couple of roles for BG Group and other operators at the time, and I tell you, I put an interface engineer. I took him away from a staff role, a well-paying 15 years in staff role with a pension, and I put him down from Aberdeen to Reading on a 12-month contract. The day rate was phenomenal. And all I'm trying to say is I always thought at that time, wow, I've changed his life with a day rate. A great opportunity, don't get me wrong, but left stability, he left comfort in a large organization to chase that rate and that opportunity. And I always thought, I wonder if that's right, or it should be a cap at disciplines to say, listen, you're never going to go over that. So loyalty both ways could work. I don't know. I'm just trying to frame it better there, but I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I think for the sort of knowledge of the industry, that's one of the biggest issues, that the cycle is so vicious that when it's a candidate market, people do that. So the guys who go offshore want to make, I want a day rate of X, so I expect it. So they don't ask for a wage based on their necessarily skills. They based it on the market. So if I'm going offshore, I want 50% more for whatever I'm doing. And then when it goes to a downturn, everything gets pulled. So people leave the industry. Then you create skill shortages. So when you look to re-recruit, which will happen in the oil and gas industry, I believe in the next 12 to 18 months, the knowledge bank is gone. So what do? You throw money at it. And I suppose that's where you talk, Kev, about I used the analogy about sport. It's exactly the same. When certain teams can pay X amount for a player and these wages, it then gets a bit silly. And now, you look at football and people get, a bog standard player is worth £20 million. Money that we, I can't imagine what that kind of money looks like, to be honest. But you then get into this vicious cycle, and the oil and gas industry has been notorious for that actually the cycle's been huge. And in 1 minute, the employer holds all the cards, and then the employee. There never really seems to be a long period of time where it seems a little bit more, the equilibrium is correct, and maybe it is a cap, but that would need to come from, there need to be so many people involved in that, stakeholders in the industry to agree to. But I think you're right. It's it's a strange one.
But back to what you were saying there about the pool. I mean, what we had at CSL was, I was new to recruitment at the time, but it was phenomenal to see the trust they had and the pool they had and the trust other people had in us, the companies. So much so that I broke down the door that was shell. They had Turner and Townsend on the books there forever. And I managed, based on my expertise in CSL Project Excellence expertise, to place planners in Excel. And then I put 2 planners in there. And behind the scenes, I knew they were looking at a scheduler. So I'd done my research and built a pool of schedulers, placed a scheduler in to accommodate that team because I knew the fit, I knew the persona, I knew the business. So it's right, having a cracking pool, proactive is the way forward in a discipline, in a pool that knows you and the client can work together.
Yeah. And in some respects, that's easier to do in niche recruitment.
Yeah.
Because it's smaller. If you're, if you're looking at admin type roles or customer service type roles or what have you, that can be more difficult. But then again, if you have a recruiter in your business who is focusing, whether they're an internal recruiter, whether it's somebody who does that recruitment for your business, yeah, if somebody is constantly focusing on, okay, well, who's told me, who's our competition, who do we want to get these people from, and how do we actually maintain contact with those? And it's never been easier than it is now to actually identify who those people are, map out those people, and start to develop those relationships. And it does take time, and it's a kind of cultural shift for an organization as well, because it's a long-term investment for a long-term financial return to shift from, and the way I think about it is, I was first kind of, I suppose, introduced to this way back in the early noughties, when it was a case of, I think it was when there was the last big candidate shortage, and then it was very much on, right, go and find these great candidates. And this is in the days before LinkedIn, so really hard. And go and find those candidates. And when you then get that candidate, then actually start to proactively, in the nicest possible way, sell that candidate to your clients. Because what you're then doing is developing that relationship with that client, with that candidate, and you're proving your value to that client, so that when they have next got, and you can start to help them understand, well, okay, just talk to this person now, because in 3 months you told me that you were doing this with your business. In 3 months you might be looking for this type of person. And it's not impossible in different roles. It's easier in niche roles, but it's not impossible in other roles. But it is a shift in culture, very much.
Yeah, I get it. The agency piece, I get it. I've never worked for an agency, but I can imagine. It's overheads are here, and speed is key sometimes. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And it's educating the clients that if they treat you if you are as an agency, if they treat you as a genuine partner in their business and talk to you about their business, you will go out and proactively do that for them. And you'll be coming to them going, here's this amazing candidate. They're actually, especially if you can be really proactive, and that candidate is still in a job. And so nobody's under that physiological pressure that Brian was talking about. You haven't got a candidate panicking and taking the first offer, and you haven't got a line manager panicking and taking the best of the bunch. And actually that gets the recruitment right. And that's better for everybody all around, especially when it's difficult now. Thanks, Lucy. Enjoy your meeting. Thank you, and apologies for the overrunning. We had a few technical issues. Anybody else got any other questions about sort of proactive and reactive recruitment at all? You can feel free to come off your mutes now if you want to actually ask it out loud. That's all right.
Sorry, I had workmen that were working with me.
I could see you were about to type, so I think you can talk.
I'm have to dash because I've got a Zoom interview to do at 10:30. But thank you very much, Helen, and thank you, Brian. And I'll probably see you the next one. Take care.
Lovely. Thanks, Helen.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. So just the four of us left. Any other questions from anybody? Well, if there's not, that's absolutely fine. We will stop recording. Stop that now.